right. So tonight's meeting is going to be a presentation by Perry Morris, our Champaign County Genealogical Society president. So I'd like to introduce Perry. After earning an associate in arts degree from Rend Lake College, Perry moved to Urbana to study theater design and technology at the University of Illinois in 1977. He didn't finish the BFA, but remained in Champaign-Urbana. Perry took business classes at Parkland and eventually earned a BA from Eastern Illinois University. Perry got a staff job at the University of Illinois in what was then called telecommunications. He retired in 2012 after 25 years. Perry has a keen interest in local history, especially in local theaters, spurred by joining in the campaign to save the Orpheum Theater when it was in danger of being torn down in 1989. Perry has served on the boards of Preservation and Conservation Association, the Art Film Foundation, and the Orpheum Children's Science Museum. Perry is indulging in his love of history as the vice president of the Champaign County History Museum. Perry met Jean Gordon, a staff member at the Champaign County Historical Archives, while doing research on theater. Jean influenced Perry to join both the Champaign County Historical Society and the Champaign County Genealogical Society. He eventually served as president of the Historical Society and has served as president of the Genealogical Society since 2014. Perry co-authored the book, The Art Theater, Playing Movies for 100 Years with Joe Muskin and Audrey Wells. He continues researching local theater history and maintains a website, cutheaterhistory.com, where he shares that research. And I will post that in the chat. So with that, we welcome our president, Perry Morris.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Make sure I get there we go. How did the Illinois Theater come to be? Let's look back at the first opera houses in Urbana. First is Busey's Hall. Busey's Block was built 1870 and survived the Great Urbana Fire of October 1871. It was built by Samuel T. and Simeon H. Busey to house the bank they had opened in January 1868 and quickly outgrew. Their building was 3 stories with an opera hall called Busey's Hall on the 3rd floor. Busey's Block and the adjacent building were destroyed by a fire caused by a defective flue in April 1878. The Buseys immediately rebuilt a 2-story building on the footprint of the 2 burned-out buildings. An opera house was again on the top floor. It was quite popular for many years, but by 1898, W.I. Saffel and Company had taken over the entire building for their department store. Busey's Block is still there, but has been remodeled over the years. It has housed the Princess Theater and currently is home to the Cinema Gallery. Heritage Block is across Main Street from Busey's. It opened in December 1871, so it was under construction during the Great Fire. It also had an opera hall on the 3rd floor called Tiernan's Hall that opened in October 1872. Building in November 1887 and moved in on 1 December 1888, using the opera hall space as their main lodge room. Like Busey's Block, the Tiernan building is still there. It too has been remodeled over the years, most notably with a large addition to the rear and a new facade designed by Joseph William Royer. It most recently housed the Crane Alley restaurant. The one-page story in the Champaign Daily Gazette of 10 January 1894 optimistically began, "Urbana will have a handsome new opera house in the near future. At least that is the talk, and some important steps have already been taken in the matter. So far, the project has been kept a secret, and consequently, few people have been made acquainted with the plans." The story went on to say that there have been occasional expressions of a wish for a new place of amusement at the county seat, and this has become more pronounced as the city's improvements have increased. Busey's Hall has well served the purpose for which it was constructed in 1870, but objection has been made that its stage is too small for first-class companies. The fault may lie in this, and yet it may be that no one has yet done the most that could be done in the management of the house. Apparently, a majority of the companies that have appeared here in the past few years have failed to strike the popular chord. There was renewed interest in 1898 after Busey's Hall had closed. In fact, the entire building had become W.I. Saffels department store. Urbana then had no opera house, leaving the Walker Opera House in Champaign as the theater for the Twin Cities. A brief report in the Champaign Daily Gazette of 9 February 1898 indicated a movement was afoot among some unnamed organizers to build an opera house in Urbana. The only details given were they anticipated organizing a stock company capitalized at $50,000 and were looking to build across from the city building. The city building was at Elm and Broadway at that time. Nothing came of this effort. There was more talk in 1902. It is hoped that Urbana will soon boast of a new opera house. The most favored location is on the corner of Elm and Market Streets, appeared in the Champaign Daily Gazette of 28 January 1902. Again, no opera house was built. In 1903, the Champaign Daily Gazette reported on 31 January, W.E. Coffin announced that he had $5,000 subscribed towards securing Urbana Opera House. Mr. Coffin had been thinking seriously about a new opera house, but no one seemed to care to assist him in the effort. So he started to raise the money himself. His goal was $25,000, and he was confident the opera house question is no myth. Despite his confidence, Mr. Coffin was not able to get the opera house built. In Champaign, the Walker Opera House was still prosperous after many years as a legitimate house booking road shows. The success of the Walker had undoubtedly stirred interest in others building a theater. In 1905, the Coliseum, basically a skating rink, had been remodeled into a theater and was booking vaudeville acts. In 1906, it was further updated and became the Crescent Theater. This theater would eventually become Champaign's first Orpheum Theater. George W. Chatterton ran an opera house in Springfield, Illinois, and had been actively building a small chain of opera houses and was interested in Champaign. It is by no means clear if the addition of the Crescent made it more difficult to raise funding in Champaign, but Chatterton began talking to promoters in Urbana. The year 1906 brought increasing interest in building one or two new opera houses in Champaign and Urbana. The Champaign Chamber of Commerce Opera House Committee had been courting George W. Chatterton and had taken options on several sites for the opera house. But it was said that Mr. Chatterton did not consider the location as the really important part. Chatterton visited Champaign on 3 February 1906, exploring the possibility of building an opera house in Champaign. He proposed that if the citizens would buy out the house at $10 per seat for the first night's performance, he would build an opera house with a seating capacity of at least 1,500 or more people that would cost $60,000 or more. The Champaign Daily Gazette quoted Mr. Chatterton, "Speaking about the location, that will be easy enough after the money is in sight." Chatterton, back in Champaign on 16 March, was looking to arrange financing to build a theater. He had modified his original proposal to pre-sell the opening night house. By the autumn of 1906, the talk in Urbana had gotten serious. A Gazette story on 22 September 1906 reported an unnamed Urbana businessman who pays more attention to the accumulation of money than he does to mere talking, says he is able to declare positively that Urbana will have a fine new opera house at the beginning of the theatrical season next year. The question has been talked of for years, but has now reached such a stage that money will do the talking. The article went on to say the theater would be a 4-story building just west of the Flatiron Building, which is where it was eventually built. These plans included 2 floors for the Flatiron store, a dance hall on the 4th floor, and a summer roof garden joined to the Flatiron Building. The reported location proved to be where the opera house was built, but the other features did not come to fruition. By October 1906, it was looking more certain that Urbana would have an opera house. Quoting the Gazette, the question of whether Urbana is to have an opera house is attracting renewed interest in the county seat by reason of an earnest discussion of the matter, which is now taking place. The ball was started by a prominent citizen who favors the opera house, saying he would be one of a number of citizens to subscribe liberally to the undertaking. This called forth a spirited protest by Reverend Willoughby N. Tobel of Trinity Methodist Church. He declared that an opera house in Urbana would be a public curse. That Reverend Mr. Tobel did not voice the opinion of most of Urbana's people was evidenced by the replies which were promptly made. Practically everyone in the county seats wants an opera house, and many are ready to back up their belief with subscriptions. It is reported that 5 of Urbana's most successful businessmen will give $1,000 each to the building of a $100,000 playhouse. The Illinois Theater, an ad hoc committee, had been soliciting people to purchase stock to make the new opera house a reality. The goal was $40,000, and by early February 1907, they had sold $34,000 worth of stock. Stockholders met in the courthouse on February 6th and formed a temporary association to take charge of the company until the company was officially incorporated. The building committee was appointed and immediately began working with Urbana architect Joseph William Royer. Together, they visited several opera houses throughout the state for ideas and to see what features they might want to include in the design. Stockholders, meeting on April 8, 1907, approved the plans for the theater. They then submitted them to contractors for estimates. It was announced that about $4,000 worth of tickets for the opening night's performance had been sold. They had maintained that $10,000 had been necessary to authorize beginning construction. Once the bids were received, they would meet to decide whether or not to proceed. The Illinois Theater Company stockholders, representing 80% of the stock, met in the supervisor's rooms of the courthouse on June 17, 1907. All were in favor of starting the building and therefore authorized the building committee to let the contract for the new playhouse. They still hope to raise $10,000 by the sale of first night tickets to be earmarked to the finishing of the theater. Contractor William F. Baird had the winning bid of $37,367 for the building alone. With anticipated costs for decorating, interior furnishings, and stage appliances, the completed building was expected to cost in the neighborhood of $50,000. The committee had made some changes from the original plan in order to reduce costs. Few changes were made in the interior, but the exterior design was made plainer than originally planned. A corridor connecting a secondary entrance on the north side, Main Street, with the main entrance on Railroad Street, where the streetcar line ran, was eliminated. Originally, the theater was to be built directly behind the Flatiron Building. The location was shifted to the extreme western end of the Flatiron property at the head of Birch Street. The new location had been donated by the stockholders of the Elk Building Association. Wrong way. Construction work on the Illinois Theater began in June 1907. The newspapers printed periodic stories keeping the public apprised of the building progress. The Daily Gazette reported on 6 July 1907 that Walsh and Hawley expected to complete the expedited foundation work the following week, and then John S. Bennett's brick masons could begin their work. The brick was furnished by the Sheldon Brick Company. The trimmings were St. Louis pressed brick. Over 1,200,000 brick were used. The Champaign Daily Gazette reported on Saturday, 14 September 1907, that the material for the roof had been delivered to the site and that continued excellent progress was being made, and there was hope to be finished for a November 15th opening. That goal came and went, though. The Gazette reported on 25 September 1907, the building committee, meeting the prior evening, had awarded the $1,000 contract for decorating the interior of the building to Mitchell and Hallback of Chicago. The Daily News reported on 9 October 1907, the steel truss to be used over the arch in the new Urbana Theater arrived Monday and was carried to the building site Tuesday morning. The piece weighs 19,000 pounds and was a big load for the team pulling it. It was said to be one of the heaviest pieces of structural steel ever used in the two cities. The opera chairs had arrived 16 October 1907. Installation of the first balcony seats was completed on 21 February 1908, and work began on the parquet and dress circles. The seating had cost about $2,000. The Daily Gazette reported on 24 October 1907, the contract for electrical work had been awarded to R.L. Rock at a cost of $2,385. 5 miles of wire and 1,100 lights would be used. A brief article in the 29 October 1907 edition of the Gazette reported that plumbing and heating contractor J.D. Green had the work well underway and expected to easily finish it within a month. All materials were on site and much had already been installed. There are 6 toilet rooms and 14 lavatories. Heat would be generated by boilers in the building's basement. According to the Daily Gazette of 8 July 1907, J.C. Hobby of Joliet was in Urbana Saturday making arrangements for painting the scenery in the new Illinois Theater. He had come from South Bend, Indiana, where he completed a new opera house. He will paint the ceiling for the scenery for the new Grand Opera House in Indianapolis before returning to Urbana. He was to start work as soon as the house was enclosed and expected to complete it within 6 weeks. It wasn't until 21 February 1908 that the Champaign Daily Gazette reported to its readers that representatives of Sossman and Landis of Chicago were in Urbana installing the scenery, and the work would be completed within the week. The scenery cost about $1,500. Also on 21 February 1908, the Daily Gazette reported that the floors had been given a thorough scrubbing, removing all the construction dirt and debris from the building, and carpets were about to be laid. There had been numerous delays in the construction, mostly due to the steel not arriving on time, but as of 11 February 1908, opening date had been set and tickets would soon go on sale. The theater building was 70 feet wide and 127 feet long. It stood 80 feet tall in the rear and 65 feet at the front. The Illinois sign on the front of the building has 18-inch letters and includes 300 lights of various colors. There were 1,900 lights used to light the entire theater. Toilet facilities were provided on each floor. The building utilized steam heat. The construction was originally expected to cost about $40,000, but ran over $60,000. Total seating capacity of the house was 1,350. The main floor sloped gently to the stage and accommodated 500 in leather chairs. There were 10 boxes, 5 on each side near the stage. They were described as a dream of art. Elaborate furnishings had been purchased for each box. There were 2 balconies. The first seated 400 and the second 300. There was also a gallery seating 100. The full house could be emptied in 2 minutes. 4 exits were provided for each section of the building. The orchestra pit was large enough for 40 musicians, and there were 2 entrances from under the stage. The stage, at 43 feet deep by 67 feet wide, was intended to be large enough for any road production. The proscenium arch is 35 feet by 37 feet. There were 2 stage curtains, the heavy fireproof asbestos curtain and one of canvas. No evidence remains to prove or disprove it, but it is likely that one or both had a decorative scene painted on it. It seems unlikely that it would have been left plain. It would also have been possible to have advertising on it, as had been common in earlier opera houses. 14 dressing rooms were located at the rear of the stage, separated from the stage by a firewall. The rooms were large and equipped with hot and cold water, lavatories, and gas and electric lights. Chorus dressing rooms were under the stage. Tickets were selling fast once the opening date had been set. There were 100 seats left the day before opening. George W. Chatterton Jr. of Danville was manager of the Illinois for his family. I'll quickly mention the staff. Resident manager was Edward F. Ray. Stage manager was William Funk. The head usher was Ralph Sutton. The electrician was Frank Anderson. Head flyman was Robert Cummins. And the orchestra conductor was Professor Gus Rudolphson. The new Illinois Theater opened on Tuesday, 3 March 1908, with a house filled to capacity. The audience mostly wore formal attire. The Daily Gazette's coverage included an extensive list of audience members with seats in the boxes and those seated in the parquet. The list included well-known people of both Champaign and Urbana. Many family names are still recognizable today, such as Mr. and Mrs. Frank Kern Robeson, Mr. and Mrs. Nat H. Cohen, Judge and Mrs. J. O. Cunningham, and many members of the Busey family. The ladies were given red and white carnations. The Gazette reported the opening was without incident, and everything went as smoothly as if the house had been open for months. Before the show, Mr. Chatterton gave a brief talk about the new playhouse, calling it the best in the state outside of Chicago. He announced the attractions for the rest of the month. The opening show was a musical comedy called Marrying Mary. Marie Cahill starred as Mary Montgomery, who is looking for a fourth husband. The Gazette gave the performance good reviews and listed 5 songs they called the hits of the evenings, including 3 Men in a Boat, and Last One is Best of All, that they called the most enjoyable of all. The Champaign Daily Gazette reported some of the comments made by the cast. Miss Cahill said, "The Illinois is simply a dream, and I am delighted with my stay in Urbana and will certainly come back every chance I get. Seldom has an actress the pleasure of playing to so expensive an audience, and it breaks all records for me." Another cast member was surprised at seeing so fine a playhouse in such a small city, and said he could see no place where any improvement could be made. The playhouse emptied quickly at the end of the performance, but quite a few people lingered to inspect the new theater. The street railway line had provided 11 cars for Champaign and University people. Every cab in the Twin Cities was also in waiting. Here's a few of the shows that played in the next few months. We've got the San Carlo Opera Company and Human Hearts, the Red Mill, Madame Butterfly, Doll's House, Two Merry Tramps, Anthony and Cleopatra. It took just a few months after the grand opening for the parade of management at the Illinois Theater to begin. The Champaign Daily Gazette of 26 May 1908 announced that George W. Chatterton, who had signed a long-term lease before the house opened, had sublet the Illinois to Marcus Hyman, then the current lessee of the Walker Opera House. Mr. Hyman's lease would take effect with the beginning of the theatrical season in the fall. In mid-June 1908, George W. Chatterton was still actively planning for the Illinois. He had signed a 5-year contract with William Jones for baggage handling. Local manager E. Ray had received a letter from Mr. Chatterton on the 15th that informed him that the season would open August 34th with a repertory company for Fair Week. Mr. Chatterton had denied the management change when the Gazette reported it in May, but a story on 28 August 1908 in the Daily Gazette officially confirmed that Marcus Hyman had leased the Illinois Theater, and Samuel Call, who was now resident of the Illinois. The story also reported that Alan J. Duncan, stage manager at the Walker, since Marcus Hyman had taken control, would then become stage manager at the Illinois. Local manager Samuel Call and stage manager Alan Duncan were hard at work with final preparations in the days leading up to the Morris Thurston's week-long stay at the Illinois, which began August 31st, coinciding with Fair Week. For several seasons, the fall reopening of the Walker had occurred the same week as the county fair. The Top of the World Company played the Illinois Theater on Wednesday, 13 January 1908. They had a close call when taking the Wabash Railroad to Danville on Thursday. 3 of the company were injured. Arthur Hill, who played the bear, was the hero of the hour by preventing an almost certain collision. The 2 baggage cars and a coach for 64 people were on the rear of the train, and when near Catlin, the rear car containing the people broke loose from the train while it was going up a steep hill and started backward at a 40-mile-an-hour clip. Hill was standing on the back platform and applied the handbrakes and succeeded in stopping the car within a few feet of a freight train rounding a curve. But the freight struck the car. Miss May Poth and Miss Bernice Hudson of the chorus jumped before the car stopped. The former's elbow was dislocated and the latter received a sprained ankle. Miss Dorothy Hutchinson, one of the Collie Ballet girls, was standing on the rear platform when the train struck the coach and was thrown against a telephone pole and injured about the shoulders and head. Nearly all of the members of the company were severely shaken up, but escaped serious injury. The Duncan Hypnotic Company opened the season at the Illinois on Monday, 13 September 1909. They gave a good performance to a packed house on the first night of the week's engagement. Mr. Duncan found several excellent subjects in the Illinois audience, with Samuel Baird as the hit of the evening. Carrier boys for the newspapers of the Twin Cities were guests of the theater managers at Tuesday evening's performance, and they had an evening of rare fun. The woman was to be put to sleep for 24 hours in plain view of the audience. On Wednesday during the day, Duncan went out in Urbana, accompanied by a committee selected by the audience to try a series of experiments with women's subjects. There was no follow-up in the newspapers about how that went, though. A paragraph in the amusements column in the 20 September 1909 Gazette announced that the Schubert brothers had leased all the houses controlled by George W. Chatterton and would take over management of them beginning October 4th. That included opera houses in Springfield, Danville, Urbana, Bloomington, and Lincoln. They would all be under the direct supervision of Herbert E. Deuce, manager of the Garrick Theater, Chicago, who had charge of the Schubert's Western interests. The Illinois Theater Company made money by leasing the theater to managers like Chatterton and Hyman. I don't know if this was a flat fee or a portion of ticket sales or both, but at this time, the company was doing fairly well financially. At their annual meeting on 1 March 1909, the shareholders decided to pay a dividend of a little more than 6%. On October 19, 1909, a total of nearly $1,000 in dividends was distributed to the various stockholders. The Corinne Company played 2 different shows on Friday the 26th and Saturday the 27th of November 1909. 2 members of the company, Parker Leonard of Brooklyn, New York, and Miss Ora Dawson of Cleveland, Ohio, were married by Judge T.J. Roth in his office at the courthouse Saturday afternoon. The evening's performance was the end of the Corinne Company's season, as part of the troupe then left to join the Blanche Ring Company at the Garrick in Chicago, and the rest went to New York to rehearse for a new Schubert attraction. Eddie Foy appeared in Mr. Hamlet of Broadway in January 1910. Foy was one of the big names at the time. He is pictured in his character as his character in Mr. Bluebeard. As a matter of fact, he was in the Mr. Bluebeard company that was playing at Chicago's Iroquois Theater on 31 December 1903 when the disastrous fire broke out that killed some 600 people and injured hundreds more. He remained composed and helped cast members escape. Foy took the stage and helped calm the audience, urging them to exit quietly and to not stampede the doors. Tuesday evening, 8 February 1910, T.R. Kerner of Chicago, a representative of Armour and Company, the Chicago meat packers, suffered a stroke of paralysis on the left side of his body while watching a locally produced minstrel at the Illinois Theater. He was taken to his room at the Columbian Hotel and was believed to be slightly improved Wednesday morning. Mr. Kerner had called on the Champaign and Urbana meat trade for several years. The Daily Gazette wrote that he was well and favorably known. He is a young man of fine build, and this was the first stroke he had suffered. The Urbana Daily Courier reported in the 24 March 1910 issue that Harry Chappell, until recently the manager of the Honeymoon Trail Company, would take over the management of both the Illinois Theater and the Grand Theater in Danville next season. J. Earl Moore was retained as local manager of the Illinois and also took charge of booking the Danville House. A letter from H.C. Deuce, manager of the Garrick Theater in Chicago, who was in charge of all the Schubert's Western houses, assures Mr. Moore that no local changes will be made. 50 big attractions were booked at the Illinois during the winter, and manager Moore thought prospects for the next season were bright. More management issues were reported in September 1910. George W. Chatterton sublet the Illinois to the Comstock Amusement Company of New York, which were acting on behalf of the Schuberts. Local manager J. Earl Moore was notified and told to turn the house over to the Comstocks and to turn his books over to their nearest representative, the manager of the Grand Opera House at Danville. In effect, the Schuberts surrendered their lease on the Illinois that was to have run until July 13, 1913. Here's the backstory. Chatterton had gone to New York and persuaded the Schuberts to take over leases on his theaters in Urbana, Danville, Bloomington, and Springfield. He had tried to convince them to also take his house in Lincoln, but they declined as it wasn't making any money. Soon after the deal had been struck, the Grand Opera House in Bloomington was destroyed by fire. Chatterton didn't have the money to rebuild, so he could make good on his contract with them. He was able to get a little help from the Schuberts, but did get the financing he needed from a syndicate. And Chatterton turned over the new house to them under a separate contract. The Schuberts then unsuccessfully sued for possession of the new theater, claiming Chatterton violated his contract. The Schuberts canceled their contract on the Illinois. The Comstock Company is backed by the Schubert Booking Company. Manager Moore wired them seeking advice regarding his leasing the Illinois Theater in his own name, as soon as he had learned the lease was canceled. The answer was there was to be no change in the theater's bookings and that additional first-class productions would be booked at the Illinois. In response to inquiries from company managers about their bookings, Mr. Moore advised them to send in their contract to be signed. St. Patrick's Church brought the famous Paulist Choir from Chicago to the Illinois in May 1911. The choir of 85 male voices was the only boys' and men's choral society in the United States. Father William J. Finn was the director, and Harcourt Brown sang 2 solos. Mrs. Hannah M. Shepard of 702 West Main Street, Urbana, had gone to the theater with Mrs. C.C. Gear, a neighbor, to attend the concert. On the way there, she complained of a shortness of breath, and after resting on the theater steps, was assisted to the restrooms by Mrs. Gear. Doctors W.F. Burris and C.A. Nichols and 2 nurses were summoned. She became unconscious and died in about 15 minutes. The body was removed to the home in the Renner ambulance without the large audience knowing what had happened. Apoplexy was given as the cause of death. H.I. Green, attorney for the Illinois Theater Company, filed suit against George W. Chatterton et al. For $10,000 in December 1911. The stockholders are holding Chatterton for about $4,600 of overdue rent. The Schuberts are also involved, claiming Chatterton double-crossed them in leasing the house to other parties, and Chatterton claims he was double-crossed because the Schuberts did not retain he and his son as managers of his properties. Then in January 1912, a trial was held. The jury returned a verdict assessing the theater company's damages at $6,016.48 against Comstock and the Chattertons. There was a separate case of the Chattertons against the Schuberts and Comstock companies that was moved to the federal court. Saul Cohen at the violin and Chick Sale telling stories appeared at the Illinois on January 9th, 1912. Two local boys. At its meeting on 3 February 1912, the board of directors of the Illinois Theater Company decided to end their relationship with the Comstock Amusement Company of New York as managers and booking agent for the Illinois Theater. The board would manage the business of the playhouse themselves. The directors were dissatisfied with the way the Comstocks had been managing the Illinois. In addition, the Comstock Company was in arrears to the owners for 2 years' rent, judgment for the sum of $6,000 having been rendered against it. The company is also obliged to pay G.W. Chatterton of Springfield $1,900 for back rent. There were 3 lawsuits pending against the Comstocks. The directors retained the present local manager, J. Earl Moore, as manager and booker for the Illinois. Mr. Moore soon sold his shoe shop in Urbana to devote all his time to theatrical bookings. Mr. Moore took a booking trip to Chicago, and upon his return, he reported to the board that the chances of booking any legitimate shows for the remainder of the season were very poor. It was then suggested that the Illinois would present vaudeville exclusively for the remainder of the season. Mr. Moore then immediately went back to Chicago to book vaudeville acts for the Illinois. One of his visits was to the Chicago offices of the Sullivan and Considine vaudeville circuit, where he hit pay dirt. The Urbana Daily Courier ran a story on Monday, 9 February 1912, headlined, "Illinois Booked on Best Circuit." It could likely be argued then, as now, whether the Sullivan and Considine circuit was better than the Orpheum circuit, but S&C definitely booked high-quality acts, as did the Orpheum circuit. At this time, vaudeville acts were playing in Champaign at the local Orpheum Theater, booked through the Western Vaudeville Managers Association, which for all practical purposes was a division of the Orpheum circuit. The theater situation in Champaign in 1912 played a part in the decision to bring vaudeville to the Illinois. The old Orpheum Theater in Champaign, at the northwest corner of Hickory and Washington Streets in Champaign, was being forced to close due to a city ordinance requiring purposes be of brick construction. The first line of the Courier article was both news and a call to civic boosterism for Urbana residents. The Illinois Theater will become a vaudeville house on the Sullivan and Considine circuit Monday, February 19th, and in the meantime, it will be the duty of every resident of this city to advertise the fact in every way he can. Upon his return to Urbana, Mr. Moore met with the Illinois directors and let them know just how anxious the Sullivan and Considine agency was to add the Illinois. The directors chose to go with Sullivan and Considine, and their meeting had barely adjourned before a telegram was on its way to their Chicago offices, notifying them to include the Illinois on their circuit. The directors knew the Orpheum in Champaign was clearing at $10,000 annually. This fact increased their confidence that vaudeville at the Illinois, a nicer, larger, and better equipped theater, would be successful. Their prime interest was giving Urbana citizens a place to go for amusement. They would be satisfied if the plan at least broke even. An audience of 500 people at both evening performances, or 750 all day, would be necessary in order to make the venture a pay. The Sullivan and Considine circuit was desperate to increase their business outside of the East Coast and had become aggressive in their fight with the Western Vaudeville Association, who were entrenched in the Midwest and West. At the meeting between Mr. Moore and the Sullivan and Considine Chicago agent, for Urbana would split the week with Decatur. The Illinois Theater began its run as a vaudeville house with the matinee on Monday, February 19th, 1912. The Champaign Daily Gazette reported, a capacity audience witnessed the performance, which was creditable from start to finish. Much care and diligence has been exercised by the management of the Illinois in presenting a first bill, which is of sterling merit and also a drawing card. The management has succeeded admirably. The bill for the first part of this week features the Models Deluxe, which are fine beyond any shade of criticism. The light effects produced on the models are not only an innovation in their line, but enhance the beauty of the pictures wonderfully. I believe that was more of a tableau than a vaudeville act. Here's 3 ads. In the center one, Princess Indita was a snake handler. Unfortunately, a couple of her rattlesnakes died at the Illinois because it was too cold for them. She skinned them and gave one of the skins to Manager Moore, who displayed it in his office for a while. There's 3 more vaudeville ads. Illinois theater manager J. Earl Moore had left June 8, 1912 on the Big Four, bound for New York, the ideal place to book the best vaudeville acts and road shows possible. His plan was to spend a week to 10 days booking both vaudeville and legitimate shows to appear at the Illinois in the next season. Not a full month later came the announcement that Marcus Hyman, current lessee of the Walker Opera House, had contracted to lease the Illinois Theater for a term of 3 years, beginning immediately. Hyman's plan was to book the road shows in the Illinois, while the Walker would have the vaudeville attractions. Mr. Hyman offered J. Earl Moore the opportunity to continue as Illinois manager. The Walker Opera House closed permanently in spring 1914 at the end of the 1913-14 vaudeville season. It was razed and the Hamilton Hotel built on the lot. Marcus Hyman's new Orpheum Theater became the local home for vaudeville when it opened on October 19, 1914. We'll run over a few more shows that played at the Illinois. Bunty Pulls the Strings was another show that remained popular in multiple revivals, even after years on the road. I've seen ads where it played the Walker. Peter Pan, starring Maude Adams as Peter, who was very well known at the time, played 3 February 1913. Naughty Marietta played 29 March 1913. The Cohen family, local popular musicians, got together for a recital on 27 May 1913. Eva Tankay, a very popular vaudevillian, played 4 April 1914. John Philip Sousa and his band played a concert on 16 October 1914. McIntyre and Heath presented the Ham Tree on 28 January 1915. Sadly, for many years, minstrel shows and blackface acts were fairly popular during a significant part of theater history, despite being racist. Gilbert and Sullivan's The Mikado, starring the popular DeWolf Hopper, played 17 February 1915. Peg of My Heart was another of those shows that toured for many years. It played the Illinois 23 February 1915. Champaign Daily Gazette reported the next day, Elsa Ryan in Peg of My Heart played to a capacity house at the Illinois Theater last night. Every seat in the lower floor and in the balcony was taken. People were turned away. No show produced at the Illinois this winter has given greater satisfaction than did the performance that night. Few entrepreneurs had experimented with opening storefront movie theaters in both Champaign and Urbana prior to the opening of the Illinois and after. In Champaign, the Varsity opened in 1906 and became quite successful. A couple other storefront theaters in Champaign, the Illinois Vaudeville and the College, were short-lived and were soon purchased by the Varsity. Other early moving picture theaters in Urbana included the Novelty in 1906, the Theatorium, and Urbana Varsity. None of these lasted very long. In Champaign, the Crystal, later renamed the Neil, opened in 1910, and the much more successful Lyric opened in 1911 and lasted until 1921. Larger theaters were opened in the teens. In Champaign, the Park was a purpose-built, freestanding moving picture theater that opened in 1913. Its name was changed to the Art in 1958. It was in business for more than 100 years. In Urbana, the Colonial was another purpose-built, freestanding moving picture theater that opened within weeks of the Park in 1913. It had good success for a few years, then waned. The Princess was created out of two storefronts in the Busey block. It opened in 1915 and was successful for several decades. Across Church Street from the Park, the Belvoir, soon renamed the Rialto, was a very large theater for road shows and movies that was built into most of the ground floor space in the adjacent Russell and Mayfield buildings in 1915. The new Orpheum was built in 1914. It specialized in vaudeville, but also showed films, typically a one-reeler after the live vaudeville acts. All these were competing with the Illinois for patrons. Then at the end of 1921, the Virginia, booking both road shows and moving pictures, opened as a major competitor. A series of management changes at the Illinois began at the end of 1914. Marcus Hyman had opened the Champaign Orpheum, so did not renew his lease of the Illinois. At that point, Joseph F. Kuchler was the Illinois theater manager. He moved to the Empress Theater in Decatur. One of the earliest times a wrestling match was held at the Illinois was September 2nd, 1915. Many more were held many times over the next years. They were almost all promoted by University of Illinois wrestling coach Paul Prinn, who was even a contestant in some. This continued after the Zenith Amusement Company took over the Illinois in November 1923. At that time, Prinn and Brown, his wrestling promoter partner, had a contract to stage 8 boxing matches, and Zenith would honor those contracts. A new contract was entered into the following year, despite opposition by some board members. It was different, though, in January 1925. The election of a new board changed the majority to those opposed, so the contract was not renewed. Here's 3 of the wrestling ads. And here's 3 more. Captain Sidney N. Cohen was a member of a musically talented family. He was the eldest son of Nat and Addie Cohen and brother to Saul and Julius. In its 5 January 1916 edition, the Urbana Daily Courier reported that the Illinois Theater Company had named Captain Cohen as manager of the theater. Cohen, along with Garrett H. Baker, Illinois treasurer, had gone to Chicago to book attractions for the remainder of the season. They were looking to bring several first-class stock companies to the Illinois. Captain Cohen would manage the Illinois as a sideline, continuing to operate his real estate and insurance business. Sarah Bernhardt brought her tour to the Illinois on 16 October 1917. With her international reputation, it might be said she was the most famous actress that ever appeared at the Illinois. And here's a ticket stub and the traditional program. The Garden of Allah appeared 7 December 1917. The Illinois Theater's 1918-19 season opened Saturday night, 23 November 1918, with Over There. J. Byron McCormick, who had managed the theater in 1915, was back as manager. A story in the Champaign Daily News announced that an entirely new heating plant had been installed. Automobile parking would be available on the ground between the theater and the Flatiron Building, and the streetcar line managers have assured Mr. McCormick that plenty of cars would be available for Champaign patrons. The story included 8 other attractions Mr. McCormick had booked for the season, including Maude Adams in A Kiss for Cinderella and Otis Skinner in his latest play. The Off Chance, starring Ethel Barrymore, played on 19 April 1919, she from the famous Barrymore family. The Better Ole came in April 1919, again with DeWolf Hopper. That the Illinois Theater is assured of the best there is in the way of attractions next year is how the Urbana Daily Courier began their story on 5 June 1919, in which they reported the announcement that the Illinois had contracted with Klaw and Erlanger and Schubert to book the theater for the upcoming season. The Illinois would open for the season on Monday, September 1st, 1919. The Illinois was now managed by the KMW Amusement Company with A.F. Blasé as local manager. He had just come here from Chicago, where for some time he has been connected with the Riviera Theater. He has been in the theater business all his life and comes well equipped to give Urbana and Champaign a thoroughly up-to-date amusement house. In an effort to minimize dark nights, an excellent program of the best motion pictures is to be provided on evenings without a roadshow. The Gazette listed 23 shows already booked, including Maytime, and some of the well-known performers included Maude Adams, Mrs. Fisk, May Robinson, Ruth Chatterton, Nora Bayes, and the Dolly Sisters. A new amenity for patrons wishing to drive their automobile to the theater was that parking would be available in the large vacant lot between the theater and the Flatiron. The lot entrance was on Main Street, and a watchman would be on duty during performances. Here we have another performance by one of the Cohen family, Saul Cohen and his family on December 26, 1919. Alan J. Duncan of Champaign leased the Illinois Theater in January 1920. Duncan had once been stage manager of the Walker Opera House, and for the past 12 years was stage manager of the Orpheum Theater. His plan was to open February 10th with the popular New York production of Maytime. Duncan said, "From now on, there will be nothing but the best offered at the Illinois. Everything that savors of cheapness will be eliminated. The Twin City people are to be given absolutely the best in dramatics, and I believe they will appreciate the fact. All my bookings will be first class, not some good and some otherwise as formerly." Here's an ad for the Maytime show, which played 6 February 1920. The Urbana Daily Courier reported in its April 22nd, 1920 edition that M.W. Busey, at a master's sale this morning, purchased the Illinois Theater for $18,733.66 to take a decree of foreclosure for $10,365.31 and judgment for $7,488.30, both held by Busey's bank. Mr. Busey was the only bidder, and he planned to lease the Illinois for theatrical purposes. The Illinois Theater Company had the right to redeem the property within 15 months. Theatrical groups from the University of Illinois occasionally presented shows at the Illinois. Mask and Bauble presented The Pigeon, 1718 March in 1922. We've got pictures of the production from the LEO. The Perrots presented Tea Time in Tibet, 7-8 April 1922. And Mask and Bauble again presented Rollo's Wild Oat, 21 October 1922. The local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan scheduled a big meeting at the Illinois Theater in January 1923. The Urbana Daily Courier reported that only the Klan members were privy to the exact nature of the gathering, but the tickets they handed out to the press and a limited number of outsiders read, "If you desire to learn the true principles of the Ku Klux Klan, you are invited to attend a lecture at the Illinois Theater, Urbana, Illinois, Thursday evening, January 30th at 7:30 p.m. Not transferable." The next day, the 31st, the Champaign Daily Gazette reported that more than 1,000 had attended the lecture and were greeted by local Klansmen in full regalia. The evening speaker was Reverend James F. McMahon, pastor of the First Church of Christ of Mattoon. He outlined the principles of the Klan and asserted that it is a Christian organization. Membership applications were distributed after the talk. The News Gazette noted that this was the first meeting of its kind ever held in the Twin Cities. Jumping ahead to September 1923, the Urbana Daily Courier reported that the Illinois Theater had been for sale for some time, but now there are rumors of two possible buyers. One is that the Illinois Traction System is considering it for a station and office building. It was right next to main tracks connecting Urbana, the university, and Champaign. The other rumored interested party is the Ku Klux Klan, as it is the only available building large enough for a Klan convention hall. Quoting the Courier, "If there is anything to these stories, M.W. Busey, owner of the theater, does not know anything about it. The only thing he does know in regard to the matter is that a man approached him recently and asked if he would give him an option on the property. Mr. Busey does not know what organization, if any, this man represents. The option has not given and as yet has not been. The theater building has been on the market for a long time, but the incident mentioned is so indefinite that the owner does not consider it a prospect." Not that many weeks later, the Champaign News Gazette on 21 October 1923 published the following report. Charles A. Bongard, Urbana, announced Saturday that a company known as the Zenith Company, lately organized, had negotiated the purchase of the Illinois Theater. Rumors to the effect that the Ku Klux Klan had negotiated the purchase were denied Saturday by a businessman of Champaign who professed to be identified with the company. Mr. Bongard stated that the name of the Klan was not mentioned in connection with the details of the sale. Then on 23 October 1923, the Champaign News Gazette announced that articles of incorporation had been issued by the Secretary of State to the Zenith Amusement Company. The company had reported 2,000 stockholders from Champaign County. Would that translate to 2,000 Klan members? The filing listed the officers as President W. E. Wheeling, Secretary J. Reynolds, and Treasurer Charles Bongard, and additional directors A. W. Slater and Fred Munson. They must have been satisfied, based on their recruiting meeting in Illinois back at the end of January, that the theater would serve their needs, because to quote the News Gazette article, this company has purchased the Illinois Theater building in Urbana for $35,000 to be used for general and amusement purposes. Zenith Klan number 56, Realm of Illinois, Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, have leased the building for their headquarters. The article continued by stating, the new owners are planning extensive programs for the winter months, consisting of theatricals, minstrel shows, boxing, wrestling, etc. They promise to bring here some of the best shows in the country and to furnish entertainment and amusement of the highest order at popular prices. The building will be renovated and redecorated. This photo of the Illinois was from the Klan newspaper, the Fiery Cross, in 1925. They may not have gotten the cross on the roof put up in time for the big November 1923 events. The first major Klan event at the Illinois Theater was a 2-day extravagant gathering of Klansmen of Champaign County, Klan number 56, Realm of Illinois, on Friday and Saturday, 23 and 24 November 1923. It began Friday afternoon at 2:15 with a matinee at the Illinois Theater for the wives of Klan members and their friends. Next came a special dinner Friday at 6 at the Inman Hotel for invited guests only. This was in honor of Imperial Wizard Dr. H.W. Evans from National Headquarters at Atlanta, Georgia, his staff of Klan officials, and prominent Urbana citizens. The dinner began with Reverend McMahon of Mattoon saying grace. A six-piece orchestra played background music. At the end of the meal, Grand Dragon Palmer of Chicago was introduced, and he presented the various visiting officials, including dignitaries from nearby states. Imperial Wizard Dr. H.W. Evans from the national headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia, then made a short talk, quote, explaining to his guests that the mission of the Klan was peaceful and honorable, and that their chief aim was to make this country a better place in which to live, close quote. Back at the theater at 7:30, they held the program dedicating the Illinois Theater for the use of the Klan. This was for Klansmen only. On Saturday, there was a big open meeting at Crystal Lake Park at 2:00. This was open to the entire community. Saturday evening at 7:45, there was a Klan wedding at the Illinois Theater. This was also open to the public. It was the first Klan wedding in the county. The ceremony was performed by Reverend O.K. Doney of Urbana, who was a state officer, on the theater stage with a cross and a United States flag. The wedding party were in full Klan regalia. It included music by a few local performers. There are pictures of this that are in possession of the Champaign County Historical Archives. I've got scans of them on my website if you care to look at them. The identities of the bride and groom was a closely held secret before the ceremony. The bride was Miss Helen Reynolds of Sydney, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. J.J. Reynolds. He was the head of the Klan in Champaign County. The groom was Harry Lee of Homer, son of Squire Lee of Homer, and was a farmer. The couple would make their home on one of the farms owned by the bride's father south of Urbana. Following the wedding, a naturalization ceremony was held at 9:15. Imperial Wizard Dr. H.W. Evans presided over the initiation of 600 new members into the Klan. The Klan sponsored three Klan rallies in February 1924. The Klan used the theater for various meetings and activities, most of which were not advertised in the papers. There continued to be theatricals at the Illinois, but from the ads I've seen, the quality was not that good. These two, All-Star Vaudeville and the Melody Four, were both in November 1923. These two are from 1926. Mask and Bauble presented Don on 7-8 May 1926, and the Wonder Man lecture on spiritualism was 3 June 1926. An early morning fire on Sunday, 3 April 1927, destroyed the Illinois Theater, transforming it into a burned-out shell. Clark H. Schooley began his story on the fire in Sunday's Champaign News-Gazette with this sentence: after having colored skies for miles with a dull red glow, the old Illinois Theater of Urbana, 312 West Railroad Street, was a mass of twisted ruins this morning. University of Illinois student Russell Williams smelled smoke while returning to his rooms at 1102 West Stoughton Street at 2:15 a.m. and immediately notified Urbana Night Police Captain Owen Wind, who sent Letty Childer to the fire station and returned to the theater site. Clifford Lakey and Harry Smith, living in northeast Urbana, also noticed smoke pouring from the theater building at about the same time and notified the fire department. The Urbana, Champaign, and University fire departments arrived quickly at roughly the same time the smoldering wood burst into flame and quickly enveloped the building. Quoting Schooley, finding efforts to save the building futile, firemen turned their nozzles upon the neighboring buildings and attempted to save them. 3 leads of hose from the Urbana pumper stationed on Central Avenue and an additional lead from a hydrant, 1,800 feet in all, were used. Men were dispatched as far north as Locust Street to drench roofs that were covered with bits of flaming oil-soaked scenery. Champaign's pumper, stationed near the Thornburn School, also employed 3 leads, 1,500 feet, playing directly on the theater. The university department were ready to fight any other fire that might break out in town. Within a couple hours, the interior of the building was only a mass of twisted timbers, which quickly fell. Live embers shot their ways high into the heavens. 3 violent explosions occurred during the fire. The first and most violent was thought to be gas. The other 2 were likely aerial bombs left over from last year's 4th of July celebration. The fire was brought under control about 4 o'clock. The origin of the fire had not been established as of late Sunday morning. Some thought it might have been spontaneous combustion of the wet lumber stored in the basement. On Monday, a story in the Urbana Daily Courier quoted Fire Chief C.C. Martin. Reaching the theater, I immediately opened all exits. Smoke poured out, but there was no light that I could see within. Suddenly, the roof fell in, and with a roar, flames shot from the front of the building, high up over the entire interior, which immediately became a furnace. The wiring never has been good. The switchboard for years has become heated on being operated. My belief is, therefore, that wiring just beneath the roof in the front part of the building caused the fire. It was thought that the fire smoldered for at least an hour before discovery. J.J. Reynolds, secretary of the Zenith Amusement Company and the Zenith Mutual Benefit Association, as well as the exalted cyclops of the Ku Klux Klan for Champaign County, believed the cause might be arson, as he and his stenographer had both received threatening calls Friday night. Reynolds had been receiving threatening anonymous letters and telephone calls for 4 years. He wouldn't disclose their nature, except to say they were most threatening. Just Friday evening, he had a phone call from a man who cussed him and called him names, and then hung up. Reynolds had held regular office hours Saturday morning with about 40 callers, then had closed at noon. He was certain no one had stayed in the building. He said only 3 men had keys, including the building watchman, who had also left at noon Saturday to visit Indianapolis, leaving the building unguarded that night. Thousands of people flocked to the theater rooms on Sunday to see the aftermath of the fire for themselves. They were kept back a safe distance from the walls, as the remaining top parts were not looking safe. The Zenith Amusement Company had paid $35,000 for the theater building when they purchased it 4 years earlier, when they determined they needed larger quarters, and has been using it for plays and ritualizing work. J.J. Reynolds said that about 3 months earlier, they cut down the insurance on the building by about half to $17,000. The Klan stood to lose about $13,000 in addition to very valuable paraphernalia. All the records that were in the 3 safes of the organization owns are safe, but numerous others in another part of the building were lost. The last gathering in the theater was a play produced by the Columbia Parent-Teacher Association on Friday evening. An Illinois Water Service Company box ad in the Champaign News-Gazette of April 10, 1927, opened with this statement. After all big fires, the question was, the water pressure good? And how much water do you suppose was used? Are always asked. It went on to quote Chief Martin of the Urbana Fire Department, who said, we had good pressure, maintaining 80 pounds pressure at the hydrant, with the pumper delivering 3 streams of water. We had all the water we wanted. We can ask no more. The water company's master meter reveals that 297,020 more gallons were pumped during the duration of the fire than is normally pumped at that time of day. Monday, after Sunday's fire, the Champaign News-Gazette reported that the Klan would be moving into a temporary home on Tuesday. Plans were already being made to rebuild as a community hall as soon as the insurance settlement was finalized. The 23 inches thick lower walls were not compromised by the fire, so they would be shortened to make a one-story building. There was a basement under the entire building, but a new roof and floor would need to be built. The new hall could accommodate 1,000 diners at a banquet. The community hall plan was never realized, and the burned out ruins continued to stand for many more months. Albert H. Flowers began foreclosure proceedings in the circuit court against the Zenith Amusement Company on 9 January 1929 in the amount of $15,000. Then in February 1930, the master in Chancery completed foreclosure with the sale of the lot, along with the still standing walls containing an estimated 500,000 brick. Purchaser was Henry B. Stein. Plans to build the Tuscan Court, 12 units of townhouses in the remaining shell of the still standing outer walls of the Illinois Theater were announced in the Champaign News Gazette on 14 February 1930. Doug Houston lived in the Tuscan Court in 1968-70. He told me via email, the complex had great character, which cannot be said for what replaced it. He also shared that it was the best place I had in the time I was an undergrad at the U of I. The building's backed up to the boneyard in the rear, but with room for a barbecue and to park a couple of cars. All units shared a common basement running under the building itself, which was filled with old furniture and other junk. Tenants helped themselves to what they needed. The Tuscan Court stood for several decades. It was replaced by a more modern 3-story apartment and office building in 1999 called the Urbana Opera House Apartments. That's the end of the presentation. And I will